All right, we are in Matthew chapter 7, near the end of the Sermon on the Mount. And we talked last week about the golden rule, and I said I wanted to come back and just touch on that just a little bit more before I moved on from there. If I can get everything situated here. We compared the different rules, the brass rule, the iron rule, and all that. We talked about that. I won't recover that. I just wanted to mention, trying to compare two sets of notes here. You think about the golden rule, man, it's tempting just to park it here. There's so much we could say about it. But when you stop and think about this principle that Jesus gave, as we did point this out last week, it would be, if it were put into practice by every person, even if it were just put into practice by every Christian, it would totally change the world. It would just revolutionize so much. And, it's a rule that is often violated, maybe not even intentionally. I was thinking about this, and I didn't mention it Sunday night. I was thinking about it. I meant to, and I just, sometimes you got so many things you're trying to talk about in a sermon, you end up leaving something out. But, you deal with a sermon on lying. That's something that at some point or other, we're all going to find ourselves guilty of. It may be something as simple as, a spouse saying, "Hey, do you like this outfit?" And you just kind of reflexively say, "Sure." And you might be thinking, "No, I don't like that." It could be something mundane as we would think of it. But it is something that happens. The same thing with this golden rule principle. It is something that none of us ever can say, "You know what, I apply the golden rule every day, all day. I never violate that. I never treat anybody any differently than I would want them to treat me." And there's two extremes that we can go to with that. And I think we have, at least in principle, touched on this before, because one principle that some folks will go to, whether you're talking about lying or the golden rule or something else, is that, everybody makes that mistake at some point. Everybody sins in that way at some point. And so, leave me alone about it. And that's what sometimes people will say, make these statements like, we're all just sinners. and Brother Moser used to say something sometimes in class, and he would say, we need to stop being sinners and start living lives that are set-apart lives, holy lives, sanctified. And when you make a mistake, own it. Repent of it, make it right. But this idea of, we're all just sinners, if we're not careful, that just becomes a crutch, an excuse. And, of course, the other extreme is somebody acting like, I just got it all figured out, and I don't struggle with this or any of that. And, so there are two different extremes there. But the golden rule is very similar as far as that. It's just like, it is very difficult to be totally honest all the time. Nobody is. It's not to say it can't be done. Jesus was. But it is something that everybody's going to struggle with at some point. Same thing with the golden rule. And, like we talked about, it's been a few months ago, it was in a Q&A. We talked about this in the context of speeding. Going above the speed limit, that's such a challenge. So many times, I don't think there's a single person in the room, in the church, in the world, who could say that there's never been a time I didn't look down, not even intending to, and I realized, going over the speed limit. And it makes us it should help us to appreciate even more the grace of God and the forgiveness that we have as we walk in the light. I don't have to sit and just wonder and rack my brain, oh no, did I say or do anything in the slightest dishonest today, so I can make sure that I utter a prayer because, I might not wake up in the morning. Well, what if I miss one? I don't have to worry about that. Because if we're walking in the light, the blood keeps on cleansing. I don't have to rack my brain every night when I lay down to go to sleep and think, oh no, was there any single time today when I did not apply the golden rule? Because I got to make sure I confess that, because if I don't wake up tomorrow, I'll be lost if I don't catch that one. No, walking in the light. And it should help us to appreciate the forgiveness that is in Christ, the grace that is in Christ. and help us to understand that. It also should help us to appreciate the sinlessness of Jesus in his time on this earth. I mean, can you imagine? It wasn't even a long life, but I mean, can you imagine living 33 years? Of course, there's childhood, but if we just said 20 of those years, 20 years, never a lie, never treated anyone any differently than he would have had them treat him. That's amazing. I mean, you stop and think about it. Is it not? I mean, I think we'd all agree it's hard to get through a day and say, all day today, and every interaction that I had, maybe if you sat at home and didn't have any interactions with people, but every interaction I had, maybe it's social media, maybe it's on the phone, maybe it's in person, and not once did I ever treat anybody differently than I would have had them to treat me. That's pretty rare, I dare say, that somebody can say that. So it is something that is often violated. Sometimes it's just a matter of neglect. It may not be that somebody says, let's face it, there are people out there that say, I don't care about the golden rule, and I'm going to treat you how I want to treat you, and I don't really care what you say about that. I don't really care how you feel about that. And ultimately, they may not come out and say it, but they're saying, ultimately, I don't care what God says about that. There are people like that. Probably around us, a lot of our acquaintances, family, and so on, and ourselves, it's probably more a matter of neglect. But we don't go into this saying, I don't really care how this person wants to be treated. But sometimes there's neglect. Sometimes parents neglect children, right? And I think about this. There have been times when I stopped and thought after an interaction with one of my children, well, that's not how I would have wanted to be treated. Sometimes you're doing something that feels so important at the time and really isn't, and you're just kind of, hush, get out, you got to go, get away, and then later on thought about that, and there have been times when I've had to go to my children and say, I'm sorry, I shouldn't have done that. That wasn't how I would have liked to have been treated. Children sometimes neglect parents, get too busy with their own lives, and this happens a lot as we get older. Sometimes we become so involved with so many things in our own lives, and that's a challenge, and I struggle with that as well. Husbands can neglect wives. It may be becoming a workaholic. It may be too much time with the guys. It may be becoming more interested in recreational activities than I am in spending time with my family. There are a number of ways to do that, but sometimes even members of the church will have this idea, well, I should be able to have my time, and I'm not saying anything against that, but I'm saying it can get to the point of neglect. And what I need to stop and think from time to time is, how would I feel if I were in her shoes? And of course, the other side of that coin is wives can neglect husbands. It may be becoming so career-oriented, they become obsessed with that to the neglect of their husband and or children. Might be devoting all of her time to the children to the neglect of her husband. That happens sometimes. There are other reasons as well, but again, just like with the man, sometimes we'd all do well to stop and say, well, how would I feel if I were in that person's shoes? Sometimes we just fail to see other people's needs, and that's a challenge sometimes. There are those that, it's almost like it's a gift. They have this perception, they just see people's needs. Sometimes it's not even a gift, it's just, it's the gift of just going up and saying, hey, what are your needs? Sometimes that's all it is. Sometimes it's spending time with folks, and you spend some time with them. And I've visited with 2 or 3 people in the congregation that have gone visiting with me from time to time, and that's one of the things that we notice is you spend some time with people, you go visit in their home, and a lot of times you find out their needs, and that's maybe something that didn't know before, just interacting inside the 4 walls of the auditorium. Sometimes we neglect the lost, do we not? We don't make any efforts to teach them, to reach out to them. That could be a simple matter of neglect, but you stop and think about that. If I'm a person who's in a lost situation, would I want somebody to reach out to me? In fact, some of you may have been brought up by Christian parents. Even in that situation, somebody took the time to teach you, but especially if you came out of religious sectarianism, aren't you glad somebody cared and took the time to speak? And you may not have even appreciated it too much at the beginning. You may have fought it tooth and nail. You may have even gotten upset along the way. I mean, I've talked to some preachers, and Brother Moser has some weird stories of stuff that's happened, especially right before somebody's about to obey the gospel because they're wrestling with it, and sometimes that's when people are the most volatile. But I think I may have mentioned to you before about the one guy. He's literally got a lamp, and he's got it in the air, and he's like, you get out. I'm about to throw this thing at you, and so Brother Moser says, why don't you just? And you have to know Brother Moser, and he's such a unique individual with his whole personality and all. But he says, why don't you just settle down and put that down, and let's just calm down, because what's going to end up happening is you're just going to run me out of your house, and you're going to have to wake me up in the middle of the night, and I'm going to have to come here to baptize you into Christ. And he wouldn't calm down, and got even more angry at that point, and get out! I'm about to do it. So he just says fine, and he leaves, and he says, well, guess what? It was about 4 a.m. I think when he told him that, he said something about you'll call me at 3 a.m. and I'll have to come back, because as the story goes, Brother Moser told it. He said I was off by an hour. He called me at 4, and he says I need to be baptized into Christ. I need to obey the gospel. And so he says I was off by 1 hour, but sometimes people get pretty volatile when they're wrestling with stuff. But we neglect the law sometimes, and that would be if we applied the golden rule in every one of those situations, and that's challenging, isn't it? Sometimes. Sometimes we fail to welcome visitors. I think Bremen does a pretty good job with this, but there's always room for improvement, and some certainly do better than others. Some may not do that at all, but we can fail to welcome visitors, and is that not a violation of the golden rule? Listen, I don't get to experience this maybe as much as some folks, because obviously most of my Sundays are here. But I have visited. I've visited congregations before, and sometimes you go and people are just so warm and welcoming, and you just think, man, this is nice, because I don't know where I'm going, and maybe it's been a place you visited numerous times, or sometimes we go back to a congregation where I used to preach or something like that. But a lot of times you're at a place and it's a strange place. You don't know where classes are. You don't know kind of what's going on, and especially if it's somebody who's not a member of the Lord's church, they may not know at all what to expect. If I'm in that scenario, it would really be nice if somebody came up to me and they welcome me, and maybe a little bit of conversation, and then maybe say, hey, do you want me to help you get your kids to class? Or here's one of my children, and they're pretty close to the same age. They'll be downstairs with them. You want them to help show them to class or whatever. There's all kinds of things we could do. But sometimes we fail to apply the golden rule in that scenario. Sometimes we fail to encourage new converts and those who maybe have been restored. But I think especially with new converts. And I haven't been a new convert for 25, 30 years. And so, some of you are in the same situation, and it's easy to forget what that's like, isn't it? But if you're brand new, especially, again, coming out of sectarianism or something like that, and you come and you're in a new place, new faces, and would you would you like it if somehow you were brought into their circle, some close friends? I mean, you're not going to be best friends with everybody. I mean, I've been here, 8.5, getting toward not too long from being 9 years. And there are people that, you get a little closer to. You may be closer in age. You may have similar interests, whatever. But, everybody wants somebody to be their friend. In fact, the studies have shown that you have about, I think, Jimmy, you shared this with me. Do you remember the number, how long it is? It's something like 60 to 90 days, I want to say, to develop some close friends within a congregation as a new convert. And 60, 90 days, somewhere in that range. Of course, that's not some kind of scientific dead set number, but the point is you don't have long. And if there are not some close ties developed, people tend to they drift away. Well, again, if we put ourselves in those shoes, if I'm new, I want to make some friends. I don't want to just, sit by myself and feel like, well, if I want friends, I'll go talk to them. Well, them, they've been there for a long time, or at least a lot longer than the new convert. So it's a lot easier for us to go and talk to somebody who's a visitor, a new convert, and so on. The golden rule is broken many times when we place demands on others that we don't place on ourselves. We expect others to do something that we're not willing to do. We call that what? Do what? We call that hypocrisy. But it's also a violation of the golden rule, isn't it? I mean, how would I like for somebody to come to me and say, this is what you need to be doing, and I go, well, wait a minute. You're not even doing that. And, of course, that's the challenge as a teacher, as a preacher. If you're a Bible class teacher, a preacher, an elder, that's why James 3:1 says, my brethren, be not many masters, knowing that we shall receive the greater condemnation. But in any situation, if I'm asking somebody to do something I'm not willing to do, well, that's, I've seen or heard of situations, I hadn't seen it personally, but heard of situations where you had a gospel preacher and would preach from the pulpit about evangelism and the need to go out and teach the lost, which is all absolutely true. But when the time came to go door knocking, the response was, well, I'm not going door knocking. This was the same person that had pushed it from the pulpit. We need to show up. Everybody needs to come for the door knocking. But he didn't go. Well, why are you not going door knocking? Well, I do my evangelism from the pulpit. Well, that's not the only kind of evangelism, folks. And if I have an idea, if that fellow was in the local congregation and there's a preacher standing up and says, boy, this is what we need to do. We need to be interested in souls. Yeah, it's all true. But then you turn around and you see that fellow's not willing to do what he's saying others should be doing. That leaves a bad taste in your mouth, doesn't it? Certainly isn't practicing the golden rule. The golden rule is broken when we have we use unthoughtful words, mean words, hateful words, gossip, on and on we could go, speech. Things that I say about somebody to somebody that I wouldn't appreciate if they were said about me or to me. That happens sometimes. Jumping to conclusions without having sufficient information. That is a violation of the golden rule. Sometimes, somebody jumps to a conclusion. We assume things, and then if you stop and think about it, would I appreciate that if somebody did that to me or assume that about me? So carrying out this golden rule, it requires some genuine agape-style love, does it not? It's not always easy. This is one of those, difficult commands, one of those hard sayings of Jesus. But, man, it can make such a difference if we put it into practice. Divorce court would be done away with if the golden rule were always followed in marriage. Child abuse, parental abuse, neglect of parents as we get older, those would all be things of the past if everybody practiced the golden rule. Jails would be emptied. Be no need for an electric chair, locks on doors, anything like that. Any kind of security, that'd all be a thing of the past because everybody just treated each other like they want to be treated. What you essentially end up with is heaven, right? That's the way it's going to be in heaven. No locks on the doors, no prisons, no need for that. Arguments and hurt feelings would be just about gone if everybody practiced the golden rule. Friendships would be solid instead of being broken up by gossip and things like that. People being taught the truth of God would increase drastically if we all practiced the golden rule. Unfaithful church members. If we all practiced the golden rule, how many members of the body of Christ would be restored instead of just being written off? That's something that I think convicts all of us to some extent or another. How often do we just say of somebody, well, they used to go here, and that's kind of the end of it. It's like, has there been any effort for restoration? Ultimately, it's up to the individual to make a choice, but it's amazing sometimes what just knowing that you're missed means. I don't know if I've ever told you about Cleveland Price or not, but Brother Cleveland was a dear, dear friend of mine at the Greens Lake Road congregation. He was also a deacon there when I came to work with them in 2003. Cleveland was just an amazing man, and not long after we left Greens Lake Road to go and work with the Highland congregation, he was diagnosed with some kind of cancer, and it took him within, I don't know, like 2 months. It was just extremely aggressive. He'd been losing a lot of weight, and he'd had about every test known to man done except for an upper GI. Simple as that is. They did the upper GI, and they found the cancer. It was in like stage 4 or 5 at that point. But such a good man. But he was a member of the Baptist church for as long as he could remember. And he got online, and some church in Texas, some Church of Christ in Texas, had a website. And on their website, they had, if you would like to study the Bible, click here, and we'll send you through mail a correspondence course. And he thought, well, I enjoy Bible study, so he clicked on it. And he studied. And he finished the course. And they sent him a little certificate. And so he says, do you have any more stuff? That's pretty good. I mean, that's just straight out of the Bible. I like that. They said, sure. And so he did another course. He did like 5 or 6 of these things. And so one day, he's living in East Ridge, Tennessee. He drives to the church building. And they were a friendly congregation. I assume still are. And so these people come up to him and say, hey, he says, oh, I'm Cleveland Price. You live around here? Yes, I live just right over here in East Ridge. And some people there that they knew him from work or some kind of associations. And so the preacher comes up to him. Hey, how you doing? And doing good. He says, sure good to have you visiting. And he says, well, it's good to be here. He says, I need to go ahead and tell you, I'm here to be baptized into Christ. And the preacher just, like a lot of us as preachers, we've encountered that before, and you kind of go, okay, sure. But there's probably some teaching that needs to be done or something. But so he says, okay, well, we'll talk about that. And he says, all right, well, let's talk about it. And so he says, well, I'd like to set up a study. And he says, well, that's good. That's fine, and I don't mind studying. But listen, I'm not right with God. And so I kind of want to take care of that, like, right away, because I'm lost. And he says, look, I need to go ahead and tell you, I've done like, the average course is about 8 lessons. He says, I've done like 40 studies, okay? Those have been through mail. I'll be glad to talk to you, but I intend to take care of this today. And he says, oh, you've done all these studies through mail. Where are they coming from? And so he tells him, and I think maybe he even knew, the preacher may have even known the congregation down there in Texas. But he gets talking to him, and of course, he understands. He finds out this guy knows exactly what he's doing. He obeys the gospel that day. And buddy, he was just as solid as a rock, faithful, till the day he died. But he told me one time, we were talking, and I was talking to him about how he became a Christian. He said about a year, a little over a year, after he obeyed the gospel, there was a knock on his door one day. And it was some of those folks from the Baptist church he'd gone to there in East Ridge. And they said, Brother Cleveland, we noticed you hadn't been to church in a while, and we miss you. We noticed you hadn't been sending in your contribution, but we miss you. And he says, you miss me? And oh, yeah. And he said, well, it's good to be missed. And he said, he said they were really pouring it on about how they missed him. And he said, he wasn't trying to be ugly, but he said, fellas, I've been gone for over a year. And you came here to tell me you missed me? You're a little late. And he says, let me tell you something. All that's a moot point, because I have learned the truth. And I've learned there's some things that I can't go along with there doctrinally. And so I'm not coming back either way. But you coming a year plus after the fact, I don't know that I'd be coming back anyway. And so sometimes we just kind of forget about folks, don't we? And it's sometimes just somebody reaching out to say, man, I miss you. I noticed you weren't, hey, listen, I'm the preacher. And sometimes if I'm gone out of town and people come up to me and say, we missed you last Sunday, hey, that means something to me. So I know it's a good thing for somebody else. Even if you're just sick, he couldn't be there. And there are people that even right here, that I know if you could be here, you would. If they're not here, it's either work, they're too sick to come, or somehow unable to. But it's still nice in a situation like that if somebody says, I missed you. But especially if somebody misses 2 Sundays, 2 services, 3 services, 4 services in a row. In fact, I've even heard of congregations where the elders had it maybe part of their care program or like BK groups or whatever we've got here, but they had some kind of a system where they would, take this attendance or notice who's there. And if somebody missed, I forget what it was. It was, I think 3 services, or it might have been based on Sunday. If you missed 2 Sunday nights in a row or 2 Sundays in a row, but it was something like 2 or 3. And if you hit that number in a row, you're getting contacted. And I mean, like numerous people. And sometimes people, they get contacted and they say, oh yeah, we're on this long vacation, or we went on a cruise and it's a 10-day cruise and it happened to get us, we went down there a little, whatever. Okay, fine. But that was the way it went. We're going to make sure we contact, because everybody, it's nice to be missed. Everybody wants to be noticed, but everybody also wants to be, missed if they're not there. But you think about it, the golden rule were implemented. The folks that handle getting Bible class teachers, you never have to find somebody last minute. You never have to find a replacement because a teacher just didn't show up and didn't let anybody know. Because people would be constantly thinking, oh, I can't be there, I'm sick, so there's nothing I can do. But oh yeah, I'm teaching a class, and I sure wouldn't want to be just left high and dry. If I was the guy in charge of getting a substitute teacher, I wouldn't want to have to do that like within 15, 20 minutes on Sunday morning or Wednesday evening. So I'm going to call. Of course, we understand sometimes we forget, but it's trying to think about others. Same thing for finding folks to lead in public worship. If we all applied the golden rule, it'd never be scrounging around constantly trying to, having to beg and plead with that. But the golden rule is just that. It's a rule. It's not a theory. It's not something that's up here and we should just, aspire to that, although we'll never make it. Yeah, you may not ever apply that 100% 24/7, but it ought to be what we're aspiring toward all the time. I saw a preacher years ago who was cleaning up a mess. I mean, a for real mess. And this was, let's just say it was a bathroom mess. And I asked, why are you doing that? Is there not somebody who takes care of that? The answer was yeah. So why are you doing that? And you know what the answer was that he gave? He said, if I was that person, I wouldn't want to have to come into this mess. I wouldn't want to have to, this be one of the first things I see. And he looked and he says, I'm not too good to clean up a bathroom. And that has stuck with me. And I try to remind myself, I'm not too good to clean a bathroom. I'm not too good to pick up trash. I'm not too good to mop a floor, vacuum a floor, to go out and visit, to reach out to somebody who's lost, to go speak to a visitor, to speak to somebody, to send a card to somebody who's not been here. I'm not too good for anything. The least I can do for my Lord is to serve others in whatever way I can. And if that's some kind of menial job that involves manual labor, great. If that's through study and preparing a lesson, great. If it's by both and I have that opportunity, I ain't too good for that. And nobody is. And may God help us all to have that mentality, looking for opportunities to serve. And so on the heels of that, Jesus gets to Matthew 7:13-14. Enter ye in at the straight gate. This is not S-T-R-A-I-G-H-T straight. It's S-T-R-A-I-T straight. Anybody got what does New King James have there? Narrow. That's the idea. Straightened, narrow. For wide is the gate, broad is the way it leads to destruction, and many there be which go in thereat. This is all kind of fitting in the context. He's going to talk about this a little bit more in 21 through 23. But here's a way that is narrow, and here's another way that is wide. And so you have 2 paths You have two, I guess you could call it descriptions. One is narrow, one is wide, one is more difficult, one is easy. You know, we mentioned, I think it was Sunday morning sermon, Luke 13:24, where Jesus says, it's translated in the English, strive to enter in at the straight gate. Agonizo in the Greek, and we get our English word agonize from that. It's not always easy, is it? I'm trying to remember, I don't think it was somebody, maybe it was somebody here that went to, might have been some friends of ours from Greens Lake Road, actually. I think it was up in Tennessee, but there's I don't know, I think it's a cave area or something. I was trying to, might be up there, the Rock City area or something. But anyways, there's somewhere in all that it's called Fat Man's Squeeze. It is Rock City, okay. So it's just a real narrow, straightened place, and you got to get through there. And a lot of times you got to just, get sideways just to try to squeeze through that thing. That's kind of this idea, this narrow way. Then there's another way that's just, the devil makes it easy. We talked about this before again with Jonah, going down, down. The devil makes the pathway into sin as easy as possible. So the straightened way is narrow. You got two ways, one easy, one difficult. You got, of course, two destinies. The straightened gate, the narrow way, leads to life. And then the wide gate, the broad path. You got two gates, two paths. I guess we could mention that as well. I better just not spend too much time on this because it sounds like we got a sermon working, so I might just want to hold off and preach on that. You got two gates, two ways, two paths. You got two destinies, life and death. And of course, you got two different groups of people. One is numerous, headed for destruction because they take the easy path. And then the other way is few because they're taking the road less traveled. Who was the poet that wrote that? Was it Robert Frost? Is that right? Yes. Robert Frost, The Road Less Traveled. That is a great, great poem. And I don't know if he read this passage and was inspired by that or not, but it certainly expresses the sentiment of Matthew 7, 13 and 14. And the fact is, I know it's not, make you feel all warm and fuzzy, but Jesus sometimes is a very much a realist. And he says, there's a straightened gate, a narrow way that leads to life, and sadly, there are few who find it. And then here's this broad way that leads to death, and sadly, that's where the majority is. And so, of course, one extreme that sometimes people will go to is to say, well, look at the crowd over here. They must be doing something right. Well, but Jesus says, straight is the gate, narrow is the way. Few there be that find it. But, of course, the other extreme that sometimes people go to is, well, if there's any number of people over here, they must be wrong. Heard a fellow say that one time. There was a congregation that was numerous, and he said, I don't think I've ever seen a congregation of 200 or more that was sound. What? You don't even know them. Well, I know they got a lot of numbers, and Jesus says straight is the gate and narrow is the way. Well, that's ridiculous. Just to be blunt, don't be stupid. There's two extremes you can go to with that. But at the same time, we also need to understand that in the grand scheme, and that's what Jesus is talking about here. He's not saying anytime you got, in fact, when you start getting down to ridiculous statements like that, well, at what point does it become numerous? This guy decided it was 200. Never seen a congregation of 200 or more that's sound. Well, I've seen a number of congregations, even bigger than that were sound. I don't deny there are challenges that you start to get into when there's 200, 300, 400 people, especially getting above that. There are challenges in shepherding and so on. That doesn't mean that they're automatically unsound. This guy arbitrarily decided 200 was the cutoff. So what about a congregation of 199? Could they be sound? And if a young mother has a baby, do they automatically become unsound at that point? You see how ridiculous you can get with this when you start trying to make rules where God hasn't made them. What that amounts to is Phariseeism. That's what the Pharisees would do, just ridiculous, arbitrary things like that. If you don't wash your hands a certain way, you're unclean, and you can't partake of any food. Well, God never made that law. So we just need to understand that in the grand scheme of things, Jesus says the majority are going to be lost. And follow-up statement to that, or I guess question, does that bother us? Does that bother us thinking about self? Do I ever stop and think, what if I'm on that wide, broad path that leads to destruction? Oh, no, I'm not, because I love the Lord. I do stuff for the Lord. And yet I read just a few verses later, Lord, Lord, have we not prophesied in thy name? Cast out demons in thy name? And thy name done many wonderful works. And Jesus turns around and says, I never knew you. So just being a spiritually minded person doesn't automatically put me on the narrow path. I mean, if I'm headed to Atlanta and I get on I-20 westbound, I can be as sincere. I can believe it with all my heart and tell people that are trying to call me or text me or whatever, hey, y'all need, I appreciate your concern, but I got this thing. I'm okay. But at the end of the day, you keep driving and you're just going away from Atlanta when you're going west out of Bremen. So I need to ask myself, does it bother me? Do I think about self? But also, does it bother me for other people? Because that is the most populated way. And sometimes, even when we tell people, you're going the wrong way, that leads the wrong way. I mean, it's like the old, I've seen cartoons and jokes about it and stuff. There's a bridge out or something like that, and people are trying to warn a fella, and he's honking at them, he's yelling back at them, and what a bunch of rude people in this town. All they do is scream at you as you go down the road. He thinks it's a bunch of jerks, and they're trying to save his life before he goes to where the bridge is out. Well, there's a way that leads to life, there's a way that leads to death. By the way, there are only two ways. If you're not on the straightened, narrow way that's leading to life, then ain't but one other choice. If you want some country grammar there. It's not but one other choice. He goes on and says, beware of false prophets which come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they are ravening wolves. Well, we need to understand the reality of false teachers. False teachers are real. And of course, Jesus is going to go on and say, you'll know them by their fruits. Now, time out. I mean, I don't know much Bible, but I know the Bible says, judge not. You begin to see the folly of that statement. That's not all Jesus had to say about judging, is it? The sum, S-U-M, of thy word is truth. Not some, S-O-M of thy word, S-O-M-E of thy word is truth. The sum total of God's word is truth. What all does God say? In fact, some people have sort of tongue-in-cheek but serious at the same time have said, I'm not judging, what's the expression? I'm fruit inspecting. And that's what Jesus says here. By their fruits you'll know them. Do men gather grapes of thorns or figs of thistles? By the way, let me just... The bell's about to ring. Oh, there it goes. Is that the first one or second? That's the first? I got 5 more minutes. All right, I was thinking that was the second one. All right, look, we're all good. He says, you'll know them by their fruits. Do men gather grapes of thorns or figs of thistles? Even so, every good tree bringeth forth good fruit, but a corrupt tree bringeth forth evil fruit. Listen, a good tree can't bring forth evil fruit. Neither can a corrupt tree bring forth good fruit. Every tree that bringeth not forth good fruit is hewn down and cast into the fire. Wherefore, by their fruits ye shall know them. Some people act like there's no such thing as a false teacher. That's ridiculous. Jesus makes it clear there are false teachers. There is such a thing. The other side of that, the other extreme, is spiritual McCarthyism. Does anybody remember? He was a senator, right? McCarthy? Is that right? This is for my time, y'all. Somebody got to help me out here. Huh? Okay. I didn't even see you there, Bob. I know you could help me on this, on the current events and historical stuff. Bob is my go-to guy when it comes to history. Senator McCarthy, what was the joke? Which was not, it was kind of a joke with a lot of truth in it. What was the expression? A communist behind every bush, right? Was that it? Or communist under every rock, something like that. But it was everywhere. He saw communism. And this person's a communist, and it almost became like a witch hunt for him. And so that's how some people are when it comes to false teachers. And if we're not careful, we can go to that extreme. Some people act like there's no such thing as a false teacher, and we all just, accept any and everybody and listen to everybody's teaching. But the other side of that is to act like there are no sound people except you and me, and I'm not so sure about you. That's some people's mentality. They reduce the faithful preachers and teachers in the Lord's church to a table for two at Cracker Barrel. Well, that's an extreme that is not true. But we do need to be aware that false teachers, they are real. So he says, by their fruits you shall know them. Here's what I was going to say when I thought I was out of time there, and I'll try to make this real quick. I don't have time to cover everything that I want to cover Sunday and what we're looking at with our series from the Moral Church. We're talking about homosexuality. One of the things that I read with people that will try to defend this is they will come to there was somebody who literally mentioned this passage, and they said experience comes into play with determining what is right and wrong. That is so utterly ludicrous to make that statement. It is so anti-biblical to make that statement. That's not true. And they said, well, even Jesus says, look at the fruit of something. And so if you could find people who are living in committed, monogamous, loving homosexual relationships, then that shows that the fruit of it is good. But that's not what Jesus is saying here. What he's saying here is, in fact, he says it, verse 18, a good tree cannot bring forth evil fruit, nor can a corrupt tree bring forth good fruit. He's not just saying, well, look at based on experience and see. No, he's saying there is right and there is wrong. And if we're not teaching what is right, we're teaching what is false, and that's false teaching. And so this idea that experience helps us to determine what is right and wrong it's impossible. It's anti-biblical. It's completely unbiblical and anti-biblical. Yes, sir?
Matthew chapter 7, verse 1 says that there's a standard. When you judge someone, you make sure you judge them by the standard, not by your opinion. And that goes dovetail with this exact thing about producing good fruit.
Yes.
What's the standard for good fruit?
Yes, and that's thank you. That helps clarify what I was saying there, and I do need to clarify that. The standard is what Tim was saying there, because you say, well, experience comes into play. Yeah, we look and say, well, okay, a good tree, is it bearing good fruit? And there's the fruit test, but that's the key that Tim pointed out, the standard, because somebody may look at whether it's homosexuality or fornication, just living together, whatever, and they may say, look, here's these people, they're productive members of society, good fruit. But see, that can't be good fruit, because there is a standard that says that's wrong, that's unacceptable, and it's sinful. And I can't change that standard. When we start trying to mess with that standard, you're messing with God. And that's when we get into some serious trouble. In fact, Jesus says, John 12:48, what? He that rejecteth me receiveth not my words, has one that judgeth him. The word that I have spoken, the same shall judge him in the last day. God's not going to come and the standard's going to be, were you a good, productive member of society? Did you contribute? Did you help the poor and the needy? Those are all good things, but they can't be good if I'm still living in sin, if I'm still in a sinful situation and I persist in that. So yes, there is absolutely a standard. All right, thank you very much. We're out of time. We'll pick up, Lord willing, with Matthew 7:21 through 23. And of course, we'll finish up. I think we'll finish up the Sermon on the Mount next week. Matthew 7:21 through 23 is one of the saddest passages in all of Scripture. I submit to you, but it's there, and we can't ignore it. Thank you very much.